going on, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Gamecite Chronicles, the console gaming podcast where we sit down each and every week to talk about our favorite hobby, video games. I'm your host, Bonfire, and this is episode number 47. 47 episodes in, my first episode that I'm recording in 2023. So I hope you guys have all had a wonderful New Year's. Getting a good start to 2023. It's kind of crazy to think that we are in 2023. And it's also funny that, everyone gets into or doesn't get into New Year's resolutions. I've seen some interesting kind of sentiment or feeling out there that it's like cool now to not have a New Year's resolution or set goals for yourself for the new year. I mean, you used to hear the phrase all the time, new year, new me. You still hear it to a certain degree, but now it's almost like that the cool thing is to not do that and just exist. And I don't know. I've never been super into, you know, setting New Year's resolutions, but I always set goals for myself. And I think that's important for everyone. Set goals for yourself, always look to better yourself, never stop learning, basic life tenets that I think are, huge contributing factors to anyone's success. And so I guess I don't understand the mindset of like not wanting to set goals for yourself and just kind of like, for your mental health, you don't want to do anything, or like you don't want to be disappointed, so you don't do this or set goals. And I just like, what, you just exist? Like that's what you want to do with your life and not strive for anything? I mean, yeah, like, sometimes you don't hit those goals and sometimes you don't make it to whatever you're trying to do or whatever your definition of success is, and that's okay. You got to learn from those. Failure is an opportunity to learn. So I don't know. I guess I don't understand that mindset. And wow, I guess we're getting a little philosophical here. But anyways, like I said, hope you guys are all doing great, having a good start to the new year. Hope you had an awesome Christmas, good winter break, all that fun stuff. I do want to give a huge shout out to you guys and say thank you for your love, kindness, and support, because speaking of goals, I wanted to surpass 400 downloads for the show moving into the new year, and we crushed that right well before the new year was even up. So, or 2022 was up, I should say. So thank you guys for that. We are well on our way, cruising towards 500 now. And, I want to, the next big like goal of mine, I guess, is to reach 1,000 downloads, which is at the rate we're going, could be a while, but I'm hoping we can, see some growth, get some new folks listening to the show and tune in, and hopefully I can line up some more guests to come on the show and some interviews and stuff like that, which I think would be really fun. And hopefully we can do that. I'm enjoying doing this as a hobby, and to the, small audience I have, the few regular folks that tune into the show, man, I appreciate you. I see you. I appreciate you tuning in, and thank you. Seriously, really mean that. Now, I've had about 2 weeks off from recording. As I mentioned in the last, I think, 2 episodes, I wanted to take some time off for the holidays, make sure I could not have to worry about, sitting down to record a show and put together the podcast and all that stuff. So I feel a little rusty coming in. And so if I'm a little rusty, maybe a little brain fog, I don't know. That's just how it goes, when you take time off. But I did have a pretty good winter break, and I definitely did some gaming. So we've got a lot of games to get through. We got a lot of things to catch up on. So this could be a pretty meaty episode, I must say. So sit back and tune in. It's going to be a good one. Now, right at the top, though, I did want to respond to a YouTube comment I got. And I responded literally to the comment in text form, but I wanted to bring it up on the show because it's about Xbox. And so I put up a clip, as I regularly do every week, from the show, talking about how, in this whole console war with the Activision Blizzard acquisition with Xbox, that in all this feud between PlayStation and Xbox and all of it, I feel like Xbox is the bad guy in the situation, despite optics and, the perception of the situation and kind of all the shit that's being thrown at each other. But I put that out there. And so I had someone write in the comments, he said, bro forgot about the Xbox 360. And I'm glad you bring that up, because the Xbox 360 era was peak Xbox. And I was a huge 360 fan. Like, the Xbox 360 was my primary console. If it was outside of the exclusives, if it was a multi-platform title, I was playing it on Xbox, with very rare exception. I think the Batman Arkham games were the only like third-party titles I played on PlayStation 3. Otherwise, I was all in on the Xbox. Loved it. It it's such a fantastic device, and that era of gaming, that 360 generation, is so iconic, and I have so many, nostalgic memories tied to to it, not only, through various life events that I went through, but also just so many games. And I think one of the things that sets that era apart from what we see now, like the current Xbox state, is back then Xbox was bringing the games. They were focused on delivering consistent, high quality games. I mean, think about some of the games that we played during the Xbox 360 era, or at least I played. I don't know if you did or not, but we had Halo 3, Halo Reach. So peak Halo, in my opinion. We had the Gears trilogy, which was incredible. Uh, we had Forza was starting to take off, which I really wasn't into, but you also had Project Gotham Racing, which was an Xbox 360 exclusive. PGR3 specifically, I loved that game. I played the shit out of it. And I'm not even a big racing guy, but that game was just so much fun to play. And when I got my 360, that was one of the games that I had with it. And so that I played that so much. So much. But then you also had others like Fable 2, which was peak Fable. Fable 3 came shortly after, not as well regarded, but Fable 2 was awesome. Then you also had games like Crackdown 2. The Dead Rising franchise was exclusive at that time. And, others coming from kind of first and second party. They were just consistently delivering those. And then you had some of their other, second and third party partnerships to bring exclusives, even timed exclusive to a degree. Like, I believe Oblivion was timed exclusive at one point. Then you had the rise of the Xbox marketplace and some of the big indies that we know of now, like Limbo started out on the Xbox 360. Shadow Complex was an Xbox 360 exclusive, I believe, at some point. And, Braid. And so they were bringing the games, bringing them consistently, delivering high quality experiences that are must play titles on that platform. And they were also doing innovative things in the kind of internet, Xbox with Xbox Live, the Xbox Marketplace, and a lot of that foundational work is kind of changed how we, interact with games today to a certain degree. And maybe you could say the same, that they're doing that with Game Pass, but that bringing the games is not here today. And maybe that'll change in 2023. We got Starfield on the horizon, Redfall. They've got quite a few other games cooking up behind their massive first party group of studios. And so maybe that'll change, but let's be honest here. In the last decade, really after the Xbox 360, they have not kept up with that quality. Like, they put Fable into the ground, really killed it after that Kinect game. Halo is just a hollow shell of itself, even though I've heard the multiplayer is pretty good, but I think from a single player campaign story wise, it's trash in my opinion. It's not even close to being what it was. Gears is I liked Gears 4. Gears 5 was fine, but like, where's Gears? Not even a word of it. Who knows if we're gonna get those games ever again? And then, Forza's, I think, still chucking along. And I think that's one of the bright spots in Microsoft. But then, there's none of these other games. Crackdown 3 was a disaster. Dead Rising is no longer exclusive. And you even start to see some of these other, big major publishers, most notably like Square Enix, not really want to bring their games to the Xbox outside of getting paid via Game Pass. And so I think that's what's different. So the Xbox 360 era was peak Xbox. And I think one of the main contributing factors is because they delivered the games consistently, and they had must play titles that drew people to that platform. One of the other things I forgot to mention too is Call of Duty. Call of Duty, like the map packs were coming first to Xbox. And we know Call of Duty could be big. They can't afford to bring it exclusively to Xbox, but that I highlight that because they were striking deals with partners to have exclusive content and must play content on their machine to draw people into the platform. And I just don't think they have it anymore with the Xbox Series X and kind of where they are currently. Again, I know Game Pass is a huge value, and a lot of people are looking to for that consumer friendly uh those consumer friendly items, and it feels good, but like what is the must play game on Xbox? Maybe you could say Forza Horizon 5. I think it's a good game, but I wouldn't say it's a must play game. I wouldn't say Halo Infinite. If you haven't played Halo Infinite, I really don't think you're missing out on it. Excuse me. I really don't think you're missing out on anything. There are some other smaller titles, but I don't know. I don't know what it is. So I just wanted to put that in there. Of course, we're going to talk about Xbox. It's always going to come up. There's been lots of news kind of back and forth between, what's going on with the acquisition and all that stuff, but we'll save that for another day. But I wanted to respond to that and kind of put this out there because I didn't forget about the Xbox 360 generation. That's a generation I hold near and dear to my heart. So I wanted to put that out there. Now, 11, almost 12 minutes into the show here. This is a console gaming podcast. And so if you're new here, remember the best way you can support the show is to leave us a nice review on the podcast platform you're listening on to. It helps us get in the algorithms, and I'd really appreciate some reviews over there. We could definitely use some. And also you can find myself and the show on kind of all the major just about all the major social media platforms. We're up on video episodes, go up on YouTube, Rumble. I just made a Facebook page over there. So if you want to search for Gamecite over there, you can find me over there. Drop a like. That would be dope. Since I just kicked that off. And then of course on Twitter at Gamecite Podcast. We're on Locals. And if you join Locals, which is absolutely free, you can get the show 2 days early, as I'll be posting the audio episodes up early over there. Otherwise, remember to catch new episodes of the show every Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I don't know why my nose itches. All right. So for this week's show, as I mentioned, lots to cover, but the main topic I wanted to dive into on this show is about the Switch. There's been a little rumor swirling around on the Nintendo platform and the upcoming Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, that I wanted to touch into. So I want to dive into that and kind of speculate on what could be next for Nintendo. Not necessarily game-wise, but platform-wise. Additionally, there are a couple small news items I want to touch on very briefly that I thought were super interesting. First off is Elden Ring has achieved a huge feat within gaming. And then the other is we finally got some confirmation around Starfield and Redfall. So we'll touch on that as well. But before we get into that, we've got to talk about the games that we're playing. And boy, have I played a lot in the last 2 weeks or so since I last recorded. Of course, I always want to hear from you guys. So remember to write in, let me know what games you've been playing, either down in the comments below, hit me up on Twitter, what have you, or over on Locals. That'd be great. Just like our buddy, friend of the show, Rob did, he left a comment here on YouTube. And it's about the first game I was going to touch on, Callisto Protocol. So he says, as far as Callisto Protocol goes, I found the melee combat frustrating as heck. I gave up a bit, hoping that the difficult combat and aggro mobs would be nerfed some. If that happens, I'll jump back in, but the combat is a key part of the game, and that type of fighting was making me not enjoy the experience. And, I hear that, Rob, and that's actually an interesting point around Callisto Protocol. So if I remember correctly, on the last episode, I was still playing the Callisto Protocol. I did beat the game. I want to say it took me around 14 hours or so. I don't remember my exact game time, but I did beat it. And overall, I enjoyed it. And the thing I got to say about the Callisto Protocol is that it doesn't do anything really new or different from Dead Space, and that's the obvious and inevitable comparison because it's from the makers of Dead Space. And I think that's okay. I totally think that's okay. And there's in a lot of ways, even from the story to a certain degree, it's got the same beats as Dead Space. It feels very similar to Dead Space, but I didn't have a problem with that at all. I think the one thing it does do differently is what you talked about, Rob, and that's the combat. The combat is, I think, the biggest differentiator between Dead Space and Callisto Protocol, because Callisto Protocol is mostly focused on melee combat. It's got this really kind of weird dodge mechanic that may or may not jive with everyone, and I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, Rob. It took me a little bit to get used to, if I'm being honest. But I think what Callisto Protocol lacks is it's just not satisfying, if I'm being honest, especially when you compare it to Dead Space, because Dead Space, it's got the iconic plasma cutter, and then some other weapons are super iconic too. Like, I can't remember specifically what they're called, but one of my favorite weapons was the one where it's really wide and it shoots these huge wide beams at your enemies, and it's perfect for just like chopping the legs off dudes. So that was really fun. And then the other one, I think it's called the Ripper, but that's the one where it shoots out the saw blade and you can just hold it on dudes and just chop them up. And the whole like chopping limbs off with your variety of different weapons, I think, is really what made that combat so much fun and engaging. And then you mix that in with some of your telekinetic abilities and stuff. Whereas this one, the more focus on melee and kind of really some generic weapons, it just wasn't as satisfying in my opinion. But I will say the way the story wrapped up. So when you finally beat the game, it definitely, and this isn't a spoiler, so at least I wouldn't consider it a spoiler. It leaves room for a sequel at the end, and so I hope they do a sequel because I would love to see where this story goes, especially given that the kind of ending you get. So it's not necessarily a cliffhanger per se, but there's room for more story to tell. I'll leave it at that. So again, overall, I liked my time with Callisto Protocol. It didn't exceed my expectations, but I think it was kind of, I guess, on par with them, maybe a little below par to a certain degree. But I still think it's a fun game. The other thing, actually, the one other thing I'll say about the Callisto Protocol that I would like to see in a sequel is one of the tenets of survival horror games is inventory and inventory management. I mean, that's a staple like in the Resident Evil games, right? And in this game, there is some of that. You do a little bit of inventory management and you do have limited space that you kind of have to be cognizant of. But there's a point in the game where your inventory size just doubles kind of arbitrarily. Just it does. And there's, I guess, kind of a story reason for that, but I won't spoil that here, I guess. But what I would rather see is I like the satisfaction of like finding upgrades to increase your inventory throughout the world and kind of do it in a more organic way as you progress through the game, rather than have this hard, I guess, pre versus post line in the sand where your inventory is this and then after it's this. I would much rather see that in try to find collectibles or find upgrades, power ups, what have you, to increase my inventory space to kind of gradually experience that. Really, I think a big tenet of survival horror games moving forward. So I'll leave that for Callisto Protocol. After that, though, I jumped into a game called Sword of the Vagrant. And I mentioned this, I think, on the last episode, stating that I picked it up. And I think I even talked about it at the beginning of summer because I remember I saw this game and it was supposed to come out, I want to say like June, end of like June or July-ish. So around like beginning of summertime. But when that time came out, like it was just nowhere to be found. It just went totally dark. And then I think it was late November, early December or something like that. It had just dropped kind of out of nowhere. And so I picked it up and finally jumped into it, played it, beat it. And this game is awesome. Like, it is genuinely great. So this game originally came out, I think, to PC only back in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, as The Vagrant. That's what the title of it was. And now it's called Sword of the Vagrant when it was brought to consoles. Developed by OTK Games and it's a 2D action RPG. And really, one of the most notable things about it is it's a game that's very much in the same vein as a Vanillaware game. So if you know Vanillaware, they're a developer. They've made their most famous game is Dragon's Crown, which came to PlayStation 3 in 2013. Then they did a Dragon's Crown Pro version, a PS4 version of that in 2018. Then their most recent game, which is 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, which is kind of this novel, like very heavy narrative story game with a little bit of like, I think, strategy gameplay in it. Came out back in 2020, and I've heard it's actually really good. I have it, and I need to play that still. It's kind of long though, from what I've seen. Then they did also did Odin Sphere back in 2007. That actually got also ported to PS4, I think in 2016, which that looks very cool. And then Grim Grimoire, which I think came out in the PS2 era, if I'm not mistaken. But I saw that they're actually bringing that game to PlayStation 5 in 2023 this year. So they're a long story developer, lots of great PlayStation games. And one of the things that's so unique about their games is the art style. It's these beautiful, like painted canvases almost, where it just looks so gorgeous, beautiful colors, beautiful technique, and it's just their games are so gorgeous to look at. And sort of the Vagrant mirrors that art style. It's not as good, but it's in the same vein uh, as Vanillaware games, and so that's one of the things that I think drew a lot of people into it. But it's so good. It's just so fun, and it's fun to explore the areas. I've seen some people classify it as like a Metroidvania. I wouldn't really state it that way. I mean, because there's like 6 places you can go in the game, and you're not doing a lot of backtracking really, unless you're kind of grinding to level up. It's not like you go and get an item to unlock an area, an area you were at before or anything like that. So it really doesn't have what I would classify as those Metroidvania mechanics. But it's more of just these kind of levels that you explore, and there's loot you can find, different weapons, different armors that you can upgrade and stuff like that, different abilities as you kind of level up your character, different enemies. But I think what stands out the most about it is the boss battles. Boss battles are tough. There's some really, really tough bosses, but it's so good. Like towards the end, there were a couple bosses where I was struggling with a little bit, but eventually, went past them and obviously beat the game. But they're really, really fun. And the other thing that I thought was I didn't expect this within this game is the story. The story is actually, it's got some mature themes and it's kind of dark, but I liked it. Like there were some moments in the story I was like, oh my God, that's dark, dude. Like, whoa. But it's good. It's really, really good. And I did the true ending. So the game does have like a normal ending, and then you can actually get a true ending if you do, a couple certain events or whatever. I did that because I wanted the trophies, and it was awesome. Like this is genuinely a great game. I think I beat it in about 12-ish hours or so. Like it's not super long. It's I think a perfect length. You can spend more time of it too if you want to grind and level up. There's New Game Plus, all that stuff. But it is a surprisingly really good game, especially for the price. This game is only $10. That's a steal. I think they could charge $20-$25 for this game, if I'm being honest. I think it's worth that price. But $10, that's a no-brainer for me. The last thing I'll say about this game, and it's in very classic Vanillaware fashion, is the main protagonist is this kind of very cliche, big-breasted female character, and all the characters are kind of designed that way, where she's basically wearing like bikini armor, boobs are hanging out, and I would say for us guys, that's not a bad thing if we're being honest. But I know some people take umbrage with that, or especially some of the media journos, if you will, for whatever reason. But there's that. So if that concerns you or maybe intrigues you, there you go. But like I said, I would highly recommend this game. If you like 2D action RPGs, or if you like and have played Vanillaware games, get this game. Sword of the Vagrant, $10. It's on Xbox, PC, PlayStation, and Switch. So go jump into that. Then after that, I'm going to take a sip of my water. I jumped into Modern Warfare, the 2019. So Cotton, this is for you if you're listening. So a funny story about this actually is that I put this game on my list, my Christmas list, as I sometimes will throw a game or two on that I just didn't get around to picking up yet on my Christmas list. And my mom picked it up for me. I'm pretty sure she got it off Amazon. And she ended up getting, and not to her own fault, she would have never known, uh, the Australian version of the game. And I noticed it when I opened it because I was like, oh, it doesn't have ESRB. So this has got to be from some other country. But I didn't think anything of it. I was like, I'm pretty sure none of this stuff's region locked, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Whatever. Turns out it is. So I put the game in, downloaded all the ridiculous amount of crap you got to download. And when it booted up the game, and then it said, oh, you're missing some packs. Like, whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. I'll download it. Tried to connect, store wasn't connecting. I was like, what the heck? Like, I'm connected to the internet. I don't understand what's going on here. So, as you would, I looked online, and other people were experiencing the same problem. And they basically said if your PSN account doesn't match the region on the disc, that you can't download these packs and will not be able to play the game. And I was like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. Like, seriously? This is region locked? Go figure. And so here I am. I'm like, I'm not gonna go to my mom and be like, Mom, this game you got me doesn't work. Like, I'm not gonna make her feel bad about that in all that stuff. So the workaround is you create another PSN account in the same region as the game, download the stuff, then you can go back to your original actual PSN account and play the game. That's the workaround. So that's what I did. And finally got the packs, downloaded the campaign, played through it. It's not super, as it is typical Call of Duty campaign. I mean, what, 6 to 8 hours, give or take. And this campaign is awesome. Like, I really enjoyed it. And it could have been too because I was just in the right mood, the right mindset to where I was like, I want to play an FPS game. It just hit, and it's a fantastic campaign. And I think it kind of reminded me that, like, the Call of Duty campaigns, for as much shit as they get, and there are some subpar ones throughout the years for sure, but I would say more often than not, they're pretty dope. And they do, yes, they offer the typical, popcorn summer blockbuster type experience, but they also keep it fresh to a certain degree, I think. And this one certainly falls into that. And I think one of the things that I liked about this one in particular is it's probably one of my favorite campaigns. I won't necessarily say it's my favorite, but it's up there because it was pretty good. But I think one of the things that was so great about it, particularly with this one, is that it toys a lot with putting the player into these morally gray situations. And so one of the kind of new features in this is there's a lot of kind of close quarters combat where you're kind of clearing rooms in the dark in these various buildings. And then you do this on a couple different levels. And there was one instance where I go into a room, and it's this mother and son in there. They start screaming, freaking out. And then the mother grabs a gun and she's about to start shooting me. So I just react and I take her out. And then, it's very sad because then the kid starts crying and it's this whole thing. And I think that's what makes this game so great is it puts you in those situations that are very realistic, because this is exactly what soldiers go through when they do these types of things. It's not clear cut. It's very gray, and it kind of makes you as a player uncomfortable and very tense. And like throughout the majority of this campaign, I felt that way. I was just kind of uncomfortable. I was very tense. I was very invested in it, and it was awesome. So cool. Like I want them to do more of this. I want it. I love the close quarters combat of it. That was so much fun. You feel so badass too. Like when you're just popping headshots, like you feel like you're a badass, like Navy SEAL. And, but there's also these other moments where like it just doesn't feel right, and you can make those decisions to where maybe you don't do it, or you do it. And I think that's really, really cool. And I think that makes this game stand out amongst, some of the other Call of Duty games, especially because they toy in that area. And there's a couple other instances where it kind of toys with, the immoralities of war, and kind of this gray, this morally gray area that I think a lot of our soldiers get put into, and some of the things that they have to do to protect our freedoms. And I found it just fascinating, and I really, really enjoyed it. And, as you play through the various levels of the campaign too, like each one offers each level, there is something a little bit different of it. So like one level I was guiding through like CCTV cams, guiding I think an ambassador or something to kind of sneak her around the enemy to get her from point A to point B. And that was awesome. Like that was really, really cool. And then there was another one where the game kind of opens up actually into this kind of open area where you can kind of go and explore these buildings in whatever order you want to, as you're kind of looking for someone and kind of clearing them out. And you get to use like the light and darkness to your advantage. So you can shoot out lights and kind of sneak around. And it kind of makes me think like I would actually like to see them do more of this open, not a full open world, but more of open areas like these sandbox areas, to where you have an X number of objectives and side objectives, and you can do them however you want. And you get a tool, set of tools at your disposal, almost kind of like the Hitman games to a certain degree, but in first person, very military oriented. That would be dope. Like that could be something really, really cool that they do from a campaign perspective. So like I said, I really enjoyed Modern Warfare 2019. It definitely leads you right into the sequel for Modern Warfare 2, which I really want to pick up now and play, because it was awesome. I may dabble in the multiplayer a little bit. I haven't decided, but it kind of just, sometimes you're just in the mood for some Call of Duty, So I may do that, but the campaign was absolutely fantastic. So shout out Cotton. That it was a good one. And then kind of in between games, I jumped into Vampire Survivor. So I've kind of been playing Vampire Survivors in and out throughout the various games that I've been playing these past 2 weeks. And for those of you who don't know, Vampire Survivors it's that roguelike shoot 'em up, as it's described, which is kind of weird, but developed by Ponkel, and it's on Game Pass. I think it first came to PC in October of last year, and then shortly after that, it came to Game Pass. And it was nominated, I think, as the best debut indie in the Game Awards, and it seemed to garner a lot of attention, which is why I was like, what is it about this game? Because I remember hearing a lot about the game and looked into it, and I was like, what the hell is this? It looks ridiculous. It's like these 8-bit sprites just running around. What am I looking at here? But I finally jumped into it, and this game is pretty awesome. I have to say, I see why people have jumped into it and like it. I think one of the things that makes it so good is it's simple. All you do, so you play as a vampire slaying character, and there's actually, as you progress, there's different characters you can unlock and stuff like that. But also, this game is very clearly inspired by Castlevania. Very clearly inspired by that. But you play as the vampire hunting dude, and all you do is you move your character around. So each character has their own kind of base set of attacks, or actually a base attack, I should say, singular. And enemies are just coming at you. Enemies are constantly coming at you, and you have to move around and attack them to get experience. To attack them, they drop little like experience gems, and the whole point is to level up. So you start at level 1, and I don't think there's a cap, but you continuously level up, and more different enemies come at you, and you survive. That's the whole point of it. And each level you kind of get a power up, And there's tons of different items in this game. There's tons of different abilities, different weapons, different power ups, tons of them throughout this game. And I think on Xbox there's like over 120 something achievements, which is wild because there's so many different things you can do in different power ups and levels and all this stuff. And at first I thought, oh, it's just the one level and you just try to survive. But then it starts to open up and the roguelite elements come into play because you get coins as you progress through the game, and you can actually permanently unlock different power ups. And then I don't know how, but I reached a point to where other levels started unlocking for me. So I did that, and I'm sorry, my nose. Ugh. But anyways, so I did that. I went to level 2, like the second level. I was playing and played on that one, and I think there's a couple more after that. I don't know how many levels there are. I don't know if there's a level cap too, like in each, I guess, stage. So I guess there's stages and levels. So your character levels up, and there's various stages that you can unlock. But it's the simplicity of it, I think, is what really attracts a lot of people because you're just moving the character and just trying to survive. But it's so fun. It's a great game to just kind of hop in, play a match or two, and then hop out. And that's kind of what I've been doing. Like I'll hop in, kind of get my quick fix, and then hop out. And that's what I've been doing. So like the farthest I've gone is I think I've gotten to level 40 on stage 2, which was I was just like in the flow state, just having the game of my life. But this is really awesome, this game comes at a really good time too because one of the things I've personally been looking to start learning for myself is kind of game development. I kind of want to start making a game. Not anything big, but just to kind of learn and expand my skills and just try something new. And personally in like my professional career, I do dabble a little bit in like coding, in analytics and stuff. And so I figured why not combine my passion for video games and kind of my interest in some of what I do professionally and just learn and see what comes up of it. And so seeing a game like Vampire Survivors, which is, I'm sure under the hood is much more complex than it seems, but is really a pretty simple game and there's not much to it, kind of makes me think like you could create something probably similar. And so it's kind of an inspiration for me from that degree. And it's just a lot of fun. So, what more can I say? I did see too that the guy that made Vampire Survivors clearly said it's a copy of another game, which I find is kind of funny. But it's awesome. So it's kind of inspired me to a certain degree as I start to go down that journey and learn about game development and stuff like that. So yeah, I would highly encourage you if you have Game Pass, especially like check it out. It's a blast. And then after that, I jumped back into Cyberpunk 2077. So I'm now about 45 hours into this game. I think I was about 35 when I kind of stopped to jump into God of War. And it took me a while to kind of get back up to speed with the story and the mechanics and the controls and all that. But God, it's so good. It's so good. Like I'm really loving my build. So I'm focusing more on like intelligence and kind of handguns and kind of hacking and stuff like that. And so I get these missions where I gotta like sneak in and steal some data or something. And so like I'm trying to go like all stealth. Like I'll go in, I'll hack the cameras, I'll avoid people, or I'll stealthily like knock them out, dump them in like boxes or dumpsters, sneak my way in totally unseen. Or sometimes like on robots, I'll just shock them and drop them. And it's just so fun. Like I've just reached this state to where it's just so much fun to do this. And I just started doing a couple more of the story missions and it's really picking up. And I gotta say, man, this game really is good. It's such a shame it launched in the state of it did, but I want to get through it because I know we got Dead Space coming out towards the end of January, as well as February is pretty packed. So the other game I kind of want to dive into is Death Stranding. That's calling me. So we shall see after Cyberpunk. And then lastly, I want to mention this just because it's been so fun, is on Game Pass, there's like a Paw Patrol kart racing game, and Paw Patrol is like this kid's show. And my son's super into it. And I downloaded it, and I started out with him just watching me play, but now he wanted to play and try it out. And so I've actually been playing this game just a little bit with my son, and it's been so fun just to watch him like get so hyped about doing something in this game. And this game definitely, you don't have to do much. Like this game, the carts will drive themselves if you put it like on easy mode. It's meant for little kids. But he actually got first place on a couple races. And I don't know if it's the game was on too super easy and it just made it that way, but he did something there. And it was that proud dad moment. It was just something him and I could share that I wanted to share on this podcast because it's super, super cool. And for those of you out there that do have kids and have shared your love of video games with them, you totally know what I'm talking about. So yeah, that's the games that I've been playing. It's a lot. I think I went on for like 20 minutes, but a lot to catch up on for video games. So now let's jump into a couple of those smaller news items. Sorry, I had to take a quick break here. I had to turn the light on because I realized it's kind of getting dark outside. So that way the camera doesn't get too dark in here and all that stuff. But anyways, let's jump into those news items. Just two couple of small ones. The first one is I saw it's been reported that Elden Ring has surpassed The Last of Us 2's record for most awarded game. So according to Push Square, an awesome news outlet, Elden Ring passed The Last of Us Part 2 as the most Game of the Year awarded game ever. And it showed that The Last of Us Part 2 had 322 Game of the Year awards in 2020, and Elden Ring has surpassed that. And I think I've got it pulled up here. It sits at 331 awards and 323 Game of the Year awards, which is insane. That's so crazy. Like From Software and Bandai Namco just got to be on cloud 9 with the success of this game. It's incredible. For context, on this website, Reset Era is where they got the information. God of War Ragnarok is at number 2 for the year with 78 awards. That's how many awards and how dominant Elden Ring is. It's just wild to me. So man, that's crazy. And the next game after that was Immortality at 6. So that's a big gap. That's huge. And it kind of saddens me to a certain degree because so many people this game has resonated with so many people. So many people love it. And I enjoyed my time with it. I want to get back to it for sure, but it just didn't resonate with me the same way that the other Souls games did. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it is. Like, I feel like an outcast because this game didn't resonate with me because as it did with like everyone else, it feels like. So I don't know. That's what it is. But I think that's such a fantastic feat and something we probably won't see for a long, long time, if ever. Because, The Last of Us Part 2, love it or hate it. That game really is a masterpiece. And then you got Elden Ring that just now surpassed that. I think it's hard to argue that game's not a masterpiece. And these are like the highest of high quality games. So, wow. I don't know. I just wanted to spotlight that because that's crazy, dude. That's a lot of awards and that's really, really big news. So, congrats to From Software and Bandai Namco. After that, the next news item I wanted to touch on was that Bethesda has reiterated that Starfield is indeed coming out in the first half of 2023. So as reported by Video Games Chronicle, a newly launched support site for Starfield states, quote, Starfield arrives exclusively on Xbox Series X, S, and PC in the first half of 2023, end quote. And this comes off the back of another rumor stating that Redfall, where VGC and others reported this, that Redfall is reportedly targeting a May release date. And that May release date news had kind of broke before this Starfield site launch. So it left a lot of folks, myself included, thinking, well, if Redfall's coming in May, presumably, I mean, you'd want Redfall out before Starfield so Starfield doesn't overshadow it. I mean, that seems logically to me. So if that's coming out in May, that only leaves June to hit that first half of 2023 mark. So are they going to really put them back to back like that? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think that's something they do, but maybe they would. And that's kind of what it's seeming like now. So who knows? But it is encouraging to see that Starfield's still slated to come out this first half. They're going to hopefully hold true to that promise in 2023. It's going to be interesting to see because I think there's a lot of hype for Starfield, undoubtedly. But I think there's also a lot of skepticism, and I'd put myself more in the skepticism camp about this game. And I think even more so, what makes it interesting is that this is like the flagship title for Xbox now. This is all their eggs are in this basket, and it's coming to Game Pass. And so, since people won't really be buying this game, like how does that work? If no, like, yes, they'll sell copies of the game. And like I said before, I imagine they're going to have some sort of collector's edition for Starfield because Bethesda has those types of fans. I've got some cool Fallout collector's editions. I'm one of them to a certain degree. But they're not going to sell, since it isn't on PlayStation, they're not going to sell, the millions of copies that they would if this wasn't on Game Pass. And so how much of a boost is Game Pass going to see in a subscription base? How long will that boost be sustained? And how is this game making money outside of sales? I don't know. That aspect really, really intrigues me. But like I said before, I'm more excited for Redfall, and a May release date. I don't like that release date window. I would actually rather see this game. Remember, Zelda is coming out in May, and I feel like every game's got to avoid that window. So I feel like a better release window would be April for Redfall. I don't think there's much coming out in April. I know you have Dead Island 2, I think got moved out to the end of April. So I don't know, early mid-April. That's perfect. That'd be perfect. So I'd much rather see that, but I think it's starting to get interesting over at Xbox. But I think what they need to do is give us some concrete information. It's time, right? There is that Xbox showcase rumor that's supposed to be happening in the I think first quarter of this year. So we'll see, and hopefully we'll get some information. But it's time, dude. It's time. And lastly, finally, let's get into the main topic of today's show. Is almost 50 minutes in, and that's about the Switch. So I saw this rumor kind of circulating online, and it states that Zelda Tears of the Kingdom could be the last major Switch release on the platform. And that's not to say it's the last game, but it's the last major first-party Nintendo game for a while until the next console. And again, this is just a rumor, but it comes off the back of a recent Digital Foundry podcast where they mentioned that a Switch Pro was in the works, but Nintendo canceled the project, possibly to avoid the risk of another console failure release like GameCube and Wii U. And hearing this, I kind of have mixed feelings on this. Because on one hand, it's kind of sad to say goodbye to the Switch, like thinking back, because the Switch has been so dominant. It's such an incredible little machine, and it's had phenomenal success. My numbers are old because I just found an article from Nintendo Life, or Nintendo Wire, excuse me, with updated numbers, and it shows the Nintendo Switch has just surpassed the Game Boy in number of units sold. So the Nintendo Switch sits at 118.99 million units sold. And are now in third place for most consoles sold, right behind Nintendo DS, which is at 154 million, and then PlayStation 2, which is about 158.7 million. So that's crazy. That's a huge feat. Like, that's wild. And actually, the PlayStation 4 is at 117, Game Boy is at 118.6. So that, like, Nintendo Switch just barely passed Game Boy. But that's a lot of Nintendo Switches. I'm kind of curious though, like how the average number of Switches per owner. Like, how many do people own? Because I know a lot of Nintendo fans own multiple Switches. I'm one of them. I have the Switch Lite and the regular Switch. So I just out of curiosity, I'd love to see those numbers. But that's huge. And then I mean, you look at the number of games that they've sold. I mean, I think Zelda Breath of the Wild has sold like 37 million copies. Mario Kart's I think even higher than that. Mario Kart 8. I mean, there's just so many wonderful games too on that platform that really stand out. I mean, obviously Zelda Breath of the Wild I mentioned. Mario Odyssey is a big one. Mario 3D World recently. Mario and Rabbids, the first one. I still think that's one of the best games on Switch. Astral Chain from a third party. Splatoon games are fantastic. You had the Animal Crossing game that took off. Smash Bros. That's huge. Luigi's Mansion 3. A couple Monster Hunter games with Generations Ultimate and Rise. Then you had the Xenoblade games, which Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3, now that I think about it. And then all the amazing, ports from Wii U and other consoles, as well as all the amazing indie games like Dead Cells that was brought over, Hollow Knight. I mean, so many wonderful games on that platform. It's kind of sad to see it possibly come to an end here in the next probably 2 years, if I'm being honest, because the Nintendo's been out. It came out in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So here in February of this year, so next month, really, it'll have been out for 6 years. So that's a long time, and it's kind of makes sense. So that's the other thing. I do think this makes sense because not only is the hardware now 6 years old, and at the time when it came out, it was kind of really already parity with the 360 and PS3, really. But we're starting to see the oldness of the hardware. Like I didn't play it personally, but I know there's been a lot of performance issues with the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet games that had come out recently. And part of that's on Game Freak for sure. But I have to imagine some of that is attributed to this old hardware. Like maybe not being able to do everything it needs to do for the games. So they're kind of in need of a hardware upgrade, if we're being honest. And you also have to wonder, okay, if this Switch Pro rumor is true, which I do think it is, because I think that the OLED Switch that we got was probably at one point going to be the Switch Pro. And then, COVID hits, we had all the chip shortages, all the shipping issues. You have to imagine maybe they were looking at that and being like, well, we could do this Switch Pro and eat into our, chip stock, so to speak, or we can not do the Switch Pro, continue to make Switches, and continue to ride this wave of success, and just see how long we can ride it out. And given the current economic and global situation, so I imagine I'm just guessing that's what they did. But you have to imagine that I bet you that Switch OLED was supposed to be the Pro model, because with an OLED screen, it's bigger. Maybe they were going to try to fit some more power in there, maybe beef up the dock a little bit. I don't know. But the question is, though, now, what could the next Nintendo Switch console look like? And this is where I think it gets interesting, because I've seen some folks say they want a dedicated console similar to like an Xbox or a PlayStation. And presumably it would have parity with Xbox and PlayStation in terms of, maybe power and performance. And it's like I hear that, but at the same time, I think like they did that at one point with GameCube, and it just didn't work out for them. The GameCube is an awesome console, and man, I wish I still had my GameCube if I'm being honest, because I loved that device. It was so cool, so unique, really unique controller, and then some really notable games on there like Super Mario Sunshine, obviously Zelda Wind Waker, I think, and Metroid Prime, Resident Evil 4, some of those. And then the super small discs, like the mini discs that were on there, like that was so cool. But it just didn't sell very well. Like I think it didn't sell well at all. And that was during the PlayStation 2, which we just went over PlayStation 2 sales numbers. That console was dominant. It destroyed both Xbox and GameCube. And so I don't know. I guess I if they were to do like a dedicated home console, like a PlayStation or Xbox, would people really choose to play that device and play, let's say, third party games like a Dead Island 2 or a Hogwarts Legacy or whatever that are upcoming on the Nintendo platform over the probably already Xbox or PlayStation they already own? I don't know. And I don't know that's what drives people to Nintendo consoles. I mean, the Nintendo Switch has outsold both PlayStation and Xbox, and it's weaker. So that's not it. There's something else there. So I think there's three things that PlayStation needs. They're not PlayStation, I'm sorry. The Nintendo needs for this next console. First is I think they need to maintain the handheld hybrid. I think that's their niche. I think that's one of the key selling points of the Nintendo Switch, and it's what makes it unique. I think it gives them ability to not only still continue to dominate the handheld market and continue to ride the wave of success with the DS and the 3DS, but it also lets them tap into the dedicated console, home console market, because you can do both. It appeals to both of those people, so a wider audience. Number two is I think it needs to be backwards compatible with the Switch library, as well as specifically play the cartridges from the Nintendo Switch. Not only, as we mentioned before, the Nintendo Switch has a huge library of games, a wonderful library of games. There's so many good ones on there. And one of the things that I think, as we've seen going into the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 generation, is that backwards compatibility is very important to the consumer. So I think it needs to have that, because anyone picking up this new Nintendo console, if they've coming from a Switch, they already have access to a ton of games that they can play from day one, outside of whatever new titles you're going to introduce. And I say that backwards compatibility is super important because, I mean, Microsoft kind of made it that way. Remember that PlayStation really wasn't going to have backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 4. They said the whole quote, believe in generations thing. Remember that? But Xbox was so dominant in terms of backwards compatibility. And I still think they're one of the leaders in that. I think they've done a great job with that. That it made PlayStation pivot to say, okay, all but like 10 games or whatever it is are available via backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 5, the PlayStation 4, and they worked to achieve that, and rightfully so. I think that was a good move on them. And so I think a lot of consumers, like that's the expectation, is they want to be able to play the games they already have on the new device with possibly up res and all that stuff. And that leads into, I think, another thing that they could the leverage with this backwards compatibility is if the next console offers the ability to play those Switch games at higher frame rates or higher fidelity, so better performance, that allows you to sell those games and maybe suck a little bit more life out of those big hits. Like, it'd be so awesome to play like Mario Odyssey or Breath of the Wild or even the new Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, at a 60 FPS, higher fidelity. That'd be awesome. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on, but my nose will not stop itching. So I apologize. But anyways, like I said, that would be so cool to be able to do that. And I even think about like Monster Hunter Rise, right? Being able to play that at upresed at 60 FPS sounds amazing. It would make that game way better if we're being honest. And so I also mentioned the ability to play the cartridges. And I say that because I think that's imperative because one of the things I've noticed, and I fall into this category as a Nintendo Switch player and owner, is that a lot of Nintendo fans are physical game collectors. And we kind of started to see this with, I didn't really find limited run games until they started doing Switch games. And they do like, indie titles, like niche indie titles and do physical versions of them. And they've expanded to tons of other games. And even other companies have kind of just catered to the Switch community in bringing digital games, physical versions of digital games to the platform, and it's huge. There's a good market for it, and so many Switch owners love to buy physical games. And the form factor is really cool with the small cartridge, the tiny cartridge, and then the case in its form factor. It's really dope. And so that's why I think it's important to be able to play those cartridges because so many people collect physical games. And so if you weren't able to play the cartridge, even though it's backwards compatible, that would be a problem. So, and I don't know what that looks like because I have to imagine that Nintendo's going to want to get away from the cartridges because the cartridges are expensive. I mean, you've heard of the term Switch tax, right? Well, that's because like buying a Nintendo Switch game is more expensive because of the Switch cartridge. So I have to imagine they're going to go away from that. I don't know if it's discs or I don't know if it's digital only or I don't know what the answer to that is. But I think the ability to play cartridges is a necessity if it's going to be backwards compatible. And I mean, let's be honest, I got my Switch right here. Like the game card slot's really tiny, just right there. So I don't think it's a big deal to maybe have that in whatever device you have. So who knows? But I do think it's imperative. Then the last thing I mentioned here that the next Nintendo console has to have is the Pro controller. I think they need to embrace it and make it the standard. I think the Nintendo Switch Pro controller is phenomenal. I remember I got it day one with my Nintendo Switch. That's how I primarily played Breath of the Wild. I love using it, and it's so good. I think it's a, I think it's one of the best controllers on the market. If I'm being honest, I think its form factor is really nice. I think it's very ergonomic. It feels comfortable. I don't have very big hands either, so maybe that plays into it. But I think it's a fantastic controller that they should just make the standard. The other reason I think that's important is because it finally gets us away from the Move and the Joy-Cons, which are very niche and gimmicky, and there's a place for them. They can be fun, but it allows Nintendo to have that parity with the other consoles in terms of how you play the games. Everyone has a controller now. You don't have to worry about the Joy-Cons. Everyone's got a controller. That's fine. And then, of course, if it's handheld, you have, maybe not the Joy-Cons, but you've got the standard, sticks and buttons and all that. So I think those are the three things that Nintendo needs. I think that's super important. But in thinking about this too, I was also thinking Nintendo's always had some sort of gimmick with their consoles, right? So like with the GameCube, right? It was the tiny little discs, the Cube console itself. The Wii, obviously, motion was big. The Wii U was the tablet, and then the Switch obviously is the hybrid handheld, and then you got the Joy Cons and so on. And so like, what's going to be the gimmick for this next console? Like, what could they do? And I'll be honest, I don't know, but I think the gimmick, and I'm going to reiterate this, is maintain the handheld hybrid. Make that be the gimmick. I think it appeals to people looking for handheld devices because there's some people out there that just play the Switch handheld. And then there are other people out there that just play it as on the TV, docked. And you capture both of these people with this device. And personally, I love the ability to, play a game docked, and then if I want to, grab it, hop in bed and continue. Like that's such a great feature for that console. And now that it's starting to get more competitive in this handheld space, with the rise of cloud gaming, Game Pass being able to play games on your phone. I think you can do that with PlayStation games now, and there's even dedicated handhelds that stream games. Like I think Logitech has one, and there's I think Nvidia or Razer has some sort of cloud device as well. And then you got the Steam Deck. Like it's getting much more competitive out there, and there's obviously a market for handheld gaming outside of mobile games. And so I think it's imperative that Nintendo stays in this space because they've been dominant in this space for a long, long time. Really, ever since the Game Boy Advance, the DS, the 3DS, all that. So I think that's going to be a must. Lastly, another thing I think they need to work on and put a focus on going into this next console generation is two things really: the virtual console and the eShop. So with the virtual console, they need to redo it. I actually booted up my Wii U the other day because I was just kind of curious on like what was on the virtual console on the Wii U because those shops are shutting down. So I was like, and I was kind of looking for a specific game in particular, but I couldn't find it. But one of the things I noticed on the Wii U's eShop is that the virtual console is broken up into the various console platforms. So they've got like a NES section, an SNES, a Super Nintendo section, a Game Boy Advance section, a DS section, a 64 section, etc. And that's awesome. That's how it should be. And so what I think they really should do is turn that into a service. They have the Nintendo Online service, and that's where you do get some of the virtual console stuff. And I think they need to bolster it and turn it into a real service. The virtual console should be divided up into those various consoles. It doesn't need to be its own app like it is on the Switch. It should just be all of the virtual console app, and then you choose the different console you want to play, and then you have a library of games to play. They could start small. Just get everything that you've done now. You've got all these NES games, Super NES games, 64 games on Switch, Sega Genesis, and then take all the, I think, DS, Game Boy games from the other virtual consoles that you've had, put that into one service and sell that. Because I think that would be amazing. And I think lots of people would eat that up. Because then you have a huge, huge library of games that you could constantly drip games into this service on the various platforms, and people would just continuously eat it up. And I think it would be low effort. And the cherry on top is that all of the games that are on this virtual console service are available a la carte. And I guarantee you, not only would people subscribe to the service, but then you would have a la carte sales as well. People buying their favorite games. I mean, how many times over the years have people bought, Super Mario World or Mario 3 or Zelda? Tons. People are going to continue to do that for their favorite games on their newest and latest platform. Now, ideally, it should be tied to your account. Maybe they'll get there, but I think that's what they need for the virtual console. Now, regarding the eShop, they just need to overhaul it. If you've been on the eShop on the Nintendo Switch, it's trash. It is complete garbage. They need to completely redesign it. They need a good UI guy in there. Just give it an overhaul. It needs to better search functionality, better curation of content, easier to find things, maybe some folders, subfolders, and get rid of the shovelware. There's so much shovelware and garbage on the Nintendo Switch eShop that either just put it in its own section called trash or don't let it come to the platform. Because every day there are so many garbage games coming to that platform. And I don't mean this as a disrespect to some of those devs, but let's be honest. I mean, if you're not kind of a mainstream game or have some sort of mega hit or some good backing behind you, releasing on the Switch, you're just going to get lost instantly. So I think the eShop needs a massive, massive overhaul. And I hope they do that going into this next Nintendo console cycle. So that's all I got for this episode. I didn't go as long as I thought I would. I did ramble a bit. So hopefully you bared with me. And again, I apologize. I don't know what's going on with my nose, but that's just sometimes how it works. But that'll do it for this week's episode. I want to thank you guys for your love, kindness, and support. Remember to follow me on the social media platforms, drop us a like, do all the things. I really do appreciate that. Helps people find the show. I think the biggest thing I can ask of you out there is that share the show, do the retweets, get the show out there, share it with your friends, your comrades, let them know to check it out. I would much appreciate that. The other thing is I am still looking to get some guests booked for the show, but if you have anyone in mind that you'd love for me to sit down and talk to, let me know, drop them, tag them, do whatever you got to do. Always open to some interesting ideas out there. Hope you guys stay safe, get some gaming in, and I'll talk to you next week. So until next time, I'm Bonfire, and I will see you online.